Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I'm honored to welcome the highest military person of the Alliance, Admiral Rob Bauer. Admiral Rob Bauer, Royal Netherlands Navy, is the 33rd chair of the Military Committee of the North Atlantic Organization. As a military advisor to the Secretary General and the North Atlantic Council, Admiral Bauer is NATO's most senior military officer. He is a conduit which advice from NATO's allied chiefs of defense is presented to the political decision-making bodies, and guidance and directives are issued to the Supreme Allied Commanders Europe, Supreme Allied Commander Transformation, and the Director General of the International Military Staff. Rob Bauer was commissioned as an officer of the Royal Netherlands Navy in 1984. He commanded the Air Defense and Command Frigate HNLMS De Ruyter. His command included a development in the Mediterranean with a standing NATO Maritime Group 2 as part of the NATO Response Force in Operation Active Endeavour. Later, he was deployed to Bahrain as a deputy commander of Task Force 150, Operation Enduring Freedom. As Director of Plans, Bauer was responsible for directing strategies relating to the future of defense, operational policy, and innovation, and the organization and structure of the armed forces as a whole, including the creation of the new Defense Cyber Command. As Vice Chief of Defense, Bauer oversaw the move towards more flexible and sustainable cooperation with private companies and organizations. As a Dutch Chief of Defense, he commanded the Netherlands Armed Forces, and that actually during the first 4 years of a substantial investments after decades of long periods of cutbacks. Sir Admiral, a very warm welcome to you. Your motto is expect the unexpected, so you have the floor.
Ladies and gentlemen, good to be here. The tectonic plates of power are shifting, and as a result, we face the most dangerous world in decades. The Institute for Economics and Peace stated in its annual Global Peace Index that the number of countries involved in external conflict has risen from 58 in 2008 to 91 in 2022. In 2022, more than 238,000 people died in global conflict. It was the deadliest year for armed conflict since the Rwandan genocide in 1994. The United Nations has stated that the world has entered into a new era of violence and conflict. For NATO, Russia's pattern of aggressive and ruthlessly destructive behavior has ushered in a new era of collective defense. And this means it is not we, but our adversaries who determine the timeline. We cannot determine a level of ambition for ourselves, for when and where we participate in a conflict. We have to be ready for any kind of attack, in any domain, in any geographical area, at any time. The NATO military authorities have been monitoring Russia's pattern of aggression for many years, and we have adapted our defense plans accordingly. We have developed several military strategies and plans that outline how we will protect ourselves now and in the future against the two main threats listed in the new strategic concept: Russia and terrorist groups. Our regional plans, agreed at the Vilnius summit last July, are the most comprehensive defense plans NATO has had since the end of the Cold War. Never before have NATO and national defense plans been so closely interlinked. This will shape our armed forces for decades to come. Allies are now actively working on making the new defense plans executable. And that includes putting more troops on higher readiness, capability building, and development, adaptation of NATO's command and control structures, creating and sustaining more enablement, being logistics, host nation support, maintenance, military mobility, and replenishment and pre-positioning of stocks. Last but not least, and crucially, more collective defense exercises and training against these new plans. Militarily, there are many more steps to be taken to get where we want to be for our collective defense. However, the responsibility for freedom does not lie on the shoulders of those in uniform alone. In order to strengthen our collective defense and at the same time support Ukraine in its existential fight, we need a whole-of-society approach. We need public and private actors to change their mindset from an era in which everything was plannable, foreseeable, and controllable, focused on efficiency, to an era where anything can happen at any time, an era in which we need to expect the unexpected, an era in which we need to focus on effectiveness. In order to change our collective mindset, we need leadership. And leaders across the alliance have taken up this baton. And this morning, Minister Pistorius showed this once again in his speech here at the conference, where he spoke about making the Bundeswehr kriegstüchtig, ready for war, fit to fight. And I cannot tell you how happy it made me to read in the introduction of the new German defense policy guidelines the following words, and I quote, "As the most populous nation and a strong economy in the heart of Europe, we have a responsibility. We must be the backbone of deterrence and collective defense in Europe. Our citizens, as well as our partners in Europe, North America, and the rest of the world, expect us to take on this responsibility." End of quote. A few years ago, language like that in a German policy paper would have been unthinkable. NATO commends Germany for taking this new approach. I think it is time to lift the mental blockade that somehow Germany should not be a leader in deterrence and defense. And I fully understand that this makes a lot of people in Germany still very uncomfortable. And I know there are still deeply held anti-militaristic beliefs in German society. A few weeks ago, I was speaking at the JAPCC conference in Essen. And outside the building were protesters with a sign, "Kein NATO-Kriegsrat in Essen." To be honest, I was tempted to stand beside them and support them, because I too have a moral objection against war. And that is exactly the reason I've been wearing a uniform for more than 42 years. Allied servicemen and women are perhaps the biggest pacifists of all, because we all serve a defensive alliance that wants nothing other than peace. NATO is the most successful alliance in history, not because of any aggressive display of military strength or territory we have brutally conquered. We are the most successful alliance in history because of the peace we have brought, the countries we have united, and the conflicts we have prevented from spiraling out of control, because of our ability to win the war before the war. But in order to keep doing that, we need all allied societies to change their mindset and become more resilient. Not only our armed forces, but our whole societies need to become kriegstüchtig. We need people to realize that war is not only something of our past, an eradicated disease that is only to be found far, far away. For 80 years, we built our prosperity on the premise of security of our soil. We never had to worry if the factory would be wiped out in a missile strike or hacked and shut down. In Ukraine, they have to think about this every day. My concern is that not enough people realize that this could actually happen to us too. That people think that reaching the 2% GDP target is a magical threshold after which all will be well. Collective defense, true deterrence, requires much, much more than that. It requires a nationwide resilience built by public and private actors. War is back on the European continent. And as fraught as the situation is, this new era of collective defense is also an opportunity for us to redefine the military-industrial complex, to move from an era in which we produced just in time, just enough, to an era in which we once again have large stocks and spare capacity in the widest sense. And as we have seen in the pandemic, stocks save lives. Both the private and public sector need to fundamentally change their approach. Both sides need to loosen the mutually destructive chokehold and stop waiting for the other to move first. We have the momentum to change the system. And this goes beyond the industry itself, all the way through to the investors. It is baffling to me that in this new era of collective defense, with war so close to our soil, there are still institutional investors and banks who deem it unethical to invest in the defense industry, who think that an investment in our own security would somehow go against the so-called ESG goals. Now, those goals were never meant to be against deterrence, which in essence is about the prevention of war. Collective defense is not about a choice pro or against war. It's not our choice whether or not to participate when our adversary decides to attack us. It's about a necessity to keep our people safe. You're either ready or you're not. You're either safe or you're not. Ladies and gentlemen, whether we like it or not, we are living in a new era of violence and conflict. Henry Kissinger, who sadly passed away yesterday, once described diplomacy as the art of restraining power. And I still firmly believe in the power of diplomacy. I firmly believe that great power competition should not be fought on the battlefield, but solved through diplomacy, and if that fails, in the courtroom. But I also believe that it's time to look at the world and see it for what it is, and not for what we want it to be. And that means we need to prepare for war and get our deterrence and resilience in order. It means we all need to become kriegstüchtig. Preparing for war is not aggressive. It's the only way to maintain peace. Deterrence is like oxygen. You don't notice it until it's gone. Together we can and should do what NATO does best: unite, adapt and protect. But we have to act fast, and we have to act decisively. If we want peace, we need to prepare for war. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. And we've got 10 minutes for questions, so please, you have the chance to talk to the most senior officer of the Alliance now. Dr. Azpudin from BDSV, please.
Hans Atzpodin, Managing Director, Federation of German Security and Defense Industries. Admiral Bauer, thank you very much for your speech and especially for your remarks on security, defense and ESG. My question is the following. What do you think could you do from NATO's side in order to finally influence the EU Commission to put a regulatory instrument in place which really makes it clear to banks and financial institutions to rate armament for our armed forces, which are maintaining peace, as you said, impressively, to rate this as a positive contribution to sustainability. This regulatory instrument is still lacking, and because we don't have it, we have this uncertainty on the bank side that they are not sure whether they should really take armament as a positive contribution to sustainability.
Two things. First, people have this magical idea of NATO being able to solve and arrange things with the EU. The funny thing is, nations make up the decisions in both NATO and the EU. So it is nations that should talk with each other. And if people members of NATO think it's a good idea to talk as themselves in the EU about it, they should. The only thing I can do is what I did today, is talk about the importance. Talk about the fact that it is ridiculous that we have this debate. That it's not ethical, that it's not sustainable because, you know, a grenade destroys things, it's not sustainable. Of course, that's the case. But I think it is sustainable to make sure that we prevent war. That is very sustainable. So it is a discussion on what were those rules, you know, designed for, not to prevent us from defending ourselves. Somebody is using it for that reason. And the other thing is people sometimes hide because, you know, behind rules or hide behind whatever. I don't think the banks were hiding behind anything when you know, before the crash in 2008. They did things then that were not allowed, probably. So I think they should think for themselves and not hide behind the EU. I think it is time that the private sector, including the financial world, is becoming part of the values discussion and not just the discussion on money. Because in the end, as I said, for 80 years, the private sector never had to think about, is my factory there tomorrow morning? Nobody had to think about security. But the times have changed, and I think they have. And it is for them a strategic investment to have proper defense in the alliance. So that's why I'm talking about it like I do. Because I think it is not only a mindset in terms of a change in mindset as I talked about in our societies, but also in the industry. It shouldn't only be about money. It should be worth something that we have stability and security. And it's not a problem of the governments or the people. It is also an issue for the private sector.
Thank you. This gentleman here.
Hello, my name is Julien Théron. I'm a researcher for the European Commission Joint Research Center. I work on hybrid threats. And I wanted to know, in your idea, how is it possible to prevent actions in the grey zone under the threshold of our action? And also if there's a possibility of doctrinal convergence between the EU and NATO in this respect. Thank you.
Yeah. No, first.
Okay. I don't think it is always possible to prevent hybrid attacks. I think we need to be more resilient in terms of our systems. So, you know, our energy infrastructure, the waterways, all the things that are connected to the internet, for example, need to be more resilient and more secure so that someone cannot get inside and do things that you don't want. That's one way to increase our resilience. The other thing is that we need to learn to basically spot it, to understand when something like that is happening. And that requires probably a lot of training, scenario-based training on you know, good exercises, basically, on high level as well, to understand what happens if, let's say, 10 different events in the nation or in Europe might actually come from one actor. And that is difficult, because you know, attribution is difficult, and then to actually agree together that it is one actor and then to act against this one actor. So it requires understanding of the, you know, the possibilities. It requires training to learn how to, you know, to see basically, this is out of normal. This is not what it should be. Maybe technology can help us there to find the not normal situations. So I don't think so it's a combination of making sure that we are more secure in technology, in our understanding, but also in terms of training, that we actually spot it earlier than we do now. And that we actually understand there's people out there of which we sometimes even say that we are working together with them, that are acting in a bad way towards us. So if we say, for example, China is a challenge in cyber and space, they are sometimes a little bit more than a challenge. So we don't have, I mean, we should stop being naive. And if it walks like a duck and talks like a duck, it's probably a duck.
Just on the EU-NATO relation, do you think it's feasible to work together in this regard?
Oh, sorry, I thought I was looking at that gentleman. Working together with the EU, I think everything is possible, and I think we should work together more. But there's reasons you and I know, and most of the people in the room know, why that actually is not happening. And as long as we leave that elephant in the room, then we can be extremely friendly to one another, but we will not achieve what is actually possible. The good news about NATO and EU is that as at the start of the war, the continuation of the war actually, because Ukraine has been at war since 2014, but in 2022, when the Russians invaded the rest of Ukraine, the way both NATO internally, EU internally, and then NATO and EU together acted was maybe for a lot of us a surprise, but the synergetic effect of those two organizations and a number of nations that worked outside of EU together with EU on sanctions was amazing. And I think that also surprised Putin, and it surprised China. So I think that is our strength, as long as we do what we're good at. And as long as we do not fight each other over things where the other is much better.
Okay. Thank you. Gentlemen.
Michael Manke, Deutsch-Atlantische Gesellschaft, Flottillenarzt der Reserve. I heard your words, Admiral, but I miss my face. How will you win? How will you win the hearts and the brains of the people? How?
First and foremost, by not bullshitting the people. I think there's too many people not explaining what we are talking about. And so it starts with explaining to people what we're talking about. And my experience in this job is, and I've visited all the allied nations. I visited 23 partner nations. And basically, if you talk to people about what the problem is, they understand. But we don't have to shy away from calling it what it is. That is one. Second, if I, for example, and I hear a lot of people say that time and time again, you know, demographically, it's impossible to find people for the armed forces. It's not true. In the Second World War, there were less people in Europe than now, and there was a much larger army. And I'm not saying we should go that way again, but it is a question of priority. It's a question of prioritization. And if we can't find the people through, you know, voluntary service, because we basically said in the 90s, we go away from conscription. We have, you know, the military to solve that problem. We have the police to solve that problem. And the people in the nation can continue their lives without looking at the consequences. And my call is that it's our collective problem. In Ukraine, they do not only look for new grenades, new tanks and artillery pieces. Unfortunately, as a result of war, they also look for new people, because people are killed and people are seriously wounded. So we can be naive and we can say it's impossible and technology has to, you know, replace people and that's the only solution. But if it will be war, we need a system, a mechanism to find more people for the armed forces. We better organize ourselves when it's peace. Now we have the time. Otherwise, it's chaos. And so I'm not saying that we have to go now to a system where, for example, all the young people go into conscription. That's a very expensive system, as we've used it for many, many years. Sweden and Norway, for example, have a smart way of conscription. They actually choose people from the young cohort of people that are 18 or finish their studies and use 5, 6, 7, 8,000 people per year that actually apply for conscription. And in those nations, it's the other way around. If you have not been a conscript, and on your bio it doesn't show that you have been a conscript, people ask, why? What happened? Why were you not in the armed forces for 2 years? So it has become something people want to have done. And I know not all the nations are the same and the culture is different, and so there's not one sort of solution that fits all, but it's naive not to think about the people problem and only look through the lens of a professional armed forces. So in many ways, if you talk about it like this, people actually understand.
Thank you. The lady, last question, please.
Thank you, Admiral Bauer, for your speech. You spoke about the importance of NATO and states making themselves kriegstüchtig and developing their deterrence. What can be done to prevent the invoking of the security dilemma and escalating?
I think the reason why Russia attacked Ukraine was first and foremost not that we were a danger to the Russians. You very often hear that, but it's not true. If that would have been true, the Russians would have responded differently to the accession of Finland. And they didn't do anything. So NATO is not a threat for the Russians. The Russians will not, they are not seeking conflict with us. Why? Because they know they will lose that. But we are not a threat to them. That's something else. So what I'm saying is not that we should look for war with Russia. That's not what I'm saying. We have to prepare for war. And if we do that, and if we are strong, that is the best deterrence. If you are at a nightclub and there's a 7-feet bouncer, you will not try to get in without paying. If it's a 2-feet bouncer, you will walk past him and go in. And that is the discussion. So we have to be credible. It's not only talking about security and defense, it is, you know, walking the talk, and the Russians will see that. And it is about the money, it's buying the capabilities, having enough soldiers at the right level of readiness, doing the exercises regularly. That will show them that what we talk about with regard to security is actually true. That will prevent war in the best possible way.
Thank you.
Do you have time for another question? Okay, one last question. Quick question, please.
Yes, it's quick. Thank you for letting me speak. Admiral, so there's been recent talks about NATO accession for Ukraine or possibly Moldova without the breakaway regions that have been fueled by Russian aggression, Transnistria, Crimea, so on and so forth. Do you support this in the future of essentially Ukraine and Moldova and possibly some Western Balkan countries getting into NATO without these regions?
That is not the discussion in NATO. I know, I read newspapers as well. So the discussions with the ministers of defense, ministers of foreign affairs, and the heads of state, and on a daily basis with the ambassadors in NATO, is not about this. So we have an open door policy. It means that if a nation wants to join, it can tell us they want to join. That's one. Second, then there is certain rules and regulations with regard to that membership. And you have to show that you are able to, not only with your armed forces, but in terms of your legal system and civilian oversight of the armed forces and all these things. That is the checklist. And then in the end, it is a discussion between the allies, the members, and they decide whether you can become a member. And we do this through consensus, so everybody has to agree. I think the leaders in Vilnius made a very important decision in July by setting up the NATO-Ukraine Council, which means that Ukraine is around the table, not as a member of NATO, but in that council as an equal to the other nations. And so they had the first meeting with Zelensky at the table, with the heads of state and government in Vilnius. We had the meeting with the military committee a couple of weeks ago. The ministers of foreign affairs had it yesterday morning. So that is a way to discuss with Ukraine in practical terms what needs to be done for them to prepare for that membership. And there is discussions on all sorts of things. As I said, that's the checklist. It's about anti-corruption. It is about a lot of things. It's not only about the military. And so there's now a discussion on what is necessary for them to be able to become a member. As long as there is a war ongoing in Ukraine, the United States President said recently, the United States will not allow Ukraine to become a member. And that is difficult with consensus. So I think it is not reasonable to think that before the end of the war, Ukraine will be allowed to join NATO. There is a decision in Bucharest in 2008 that NATO wants Ukraine and Georgia to become a member. That is also a decision. But the when and the things they need to, to have done before they can become a member is part of the discussion, and all the nations have to agree on it. And first, as long as the war in Ukraine is ongoing, it is very unlikely that it will happen.
Admiral Bauer, thank you very much indeed for your frank speech, and thank you for answering our questions. And good luck to the Alliance and to you personally. Thank you very much indeed.